Hi everyone. So today I'm going to be demonstrating a new feature available in the version 12.1.1 release of Simple GIS, and it's one of the more powerful features in Simple GIS, I think, and it involves our custom data forms. So if you're familiar with Simple GIS, since about the 11.6 release, we have this capability for users to be able to create and define their own custom data forms to display the attribute data out of their shapefiles or vector layers. And it has a nice visual form designer that requires absolutely no coding, but it provides a very powerful way to display custom data forms, as well as linking in documents such as PDFs, spreadsheets, even photos, and you can link and manage those within this custom form designer to display these related documents to features in your shapefile. And so if I look at it, for instance, I have a culvert shapefile that I've added to this particular map, and I actually already have a custom data form designed for it. And so if I was to view the feature data for this shapefile by using the View Feature Data tool, have my culverts as the active layer, so I use this tool and then click on an actual feature, you see that I have already defined this custom data form. It has a set, some radio buttons to use to display the data or capture data, as well as I have a PDF document linked to this particular feature that allows you to click on it and launch that document to view it. Uh, so we already have this custom data form, and in addition, I even have a related table that I've linked into the shapefile that contains inspection data for this particular culvert. And so again, all of this is features that's already been available in Simple GIS. But what's been added is now, in addition to just linking in an external table, like I've done here, where I might have a one-to-many relationship between a feature in the shapefile and some records in a table, I can also now design a secondary pop-up form for this table, such that you can imagine if I had, multiple rows of inspection data, done at different intervals of time, and I can view the data in this table view, but if I want a nicer way to view this inspection record, I now have the ability to define a custom pop-up form for your table, such that by simply double clicking on a record in the table, it brings up this new data form. And again, it acts very similar to the normal custom data form that displays your feature data in your shapefile. It's just that this form is now designed to display data out of that related or linked table that we've tied to this feature in our shapefile. So in this case, if I had inspection data, you can see I have the date of the inspection, who inspected it, and then I have a set of radio buttons for the condition assessment. And I can even link additional photos and documents to an individual record in that table. So in this case, if I had photographic evidence of the inspection, for instance, that I wanted to document, I could easily link that information in to this table record and have a record of that in my inspection data that's easily accessible right from this form. So for the rest of this demo, I'm going to go step by step and show you how I created this new table for this new form for this linked table using the new features available in this latest release of Simple GIS. So I'm going to go ahead and dismiss these forms for now. And I want to start from scratch, so I'm going to remove my culvert shapefile from the map. And I'm going to go ahead and re-add it using my Add Data tool. So I'm going to add my shapefile. And I don't want to add it as a group layer. I want it just as an independent layer at the top of my map. So I'm going to select No. And then for the layer properties for now, I'm just going to accept the defaults and click Apply and close my dialog box. And you see that I've now re-added that shapefile to my map. And the reason I reloaded it is I had saved out just a a standard data form that I'd already created for the shapefile, so that when I reloaded it, it just reloaded that just standard typical data form that I'd created without the link table information, so I can go through and show you step by step how to build those additional forms. So if I was to come select my culverts and click on my view feature data and click on the culvert now, you see that I have the attribute data, but I don't have any of the link table information in on my form. So at this point in time, I'm going to go to my layer properties for my culverts, and the easiest way to do that is simply double click on the layer in my table of contents, and it'll bring up the layer properties dialog box for that layer. And I'm going to go to this first tab under the layer properties. And again, if you're familiar with prior releases, you know that in the lower right corner of this tab is a button for the custom form editor, which is where you go to design your custom attribute data form. And so I'll go ahead and click on this button, and then it's going to bring up the form designer with the form I had already, the default form I'd already designed for this shapefile. So as I said, right now I don't have the table records that I showed earlier in this video. So now we're going to go step by step and show you how to build that from scratch. So to begin with, for my form, I'm going to resize it because I need to make room for the table. So I'm just going to click on the form and then move my mouse to the edge of the form to when I see the cursor change, and just click and drag. And I'm going to drag my form down to resize it and make it taller. And then likewise, I'm going to click on my OK and cancel button, and then just click, and then I'm going to drag them down towards the bottom of the form as well. Get them out of the way. And what I'll do, I'll go ahead and I'll add a label for my table that I'm going to add here shortly. And so I'm going to go to my toolbox and I'll select the label tool. I'll click on the form where I want to add the label. And for this label, I'm simply going to call it inspections. Now at this point, I'm going to go to my toolbox and I'm going to select the link table tool. As I click on this tool, and I'm going to click underneath my inspections label. And as I do that, I get a dialog box just prompting me wanting to know, am I wanting to link to an existing table that already exists, or am I going to create a brand new empty table that I'm going to use to hold my records, and I'm going to start populating going forward. So for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to create a new table. And as I do that, because this is a shapefile that I'm working on, it creates a new subfolder underneath the root of my shapefile already to hold my table. And now I just need to enter in a name for my tables. And so I'm going to call this inspections. And I need to add what fields that I want this table to contain. So by default, it has a single field called ID, and we'll leave that because that's the field we'll actually use to establish our relationship between records in this table and the feature in the shapefile. So the way this works, it acts as a one-to-many relationship where one feature in the shapefile may have one or more related records in this table, and it uses this ID field or really whatever field you specify as the link between the shapefile and the external table. So for the purpose of this, I'll leave the ID, and then I'm just going to add some additional fields. And so the first field I'm going to add is called inspection date. And because this is a local table, I am limited to 11 characters in my field name, so I just have to be cognizant of that. And for my inspection date, for reasons that hopefully will come clear a little later, I'm going to leave it set as a string field type with a field width of 10 characters wide. So I'm going to apply that. And I'm going to add another field. Again, I'm just going to go to this plus button above my field grid here. Click on it to add a new field. And now maybe I'll add a field for inspected by. And I'll make this field wide enough so that if they wanted to type their full name in, they could. So I'll make that 30 characters wide. There's a string again, of course. Apply that. And then I might add another field for a condition assessment. So for an overall condition assessment. And I'll leave this as a string as well, and I'll leave it as 10 characters wide. So this might just hold something like good, fair, poor in terms of the overall condition assessment. Let me add another one, and I'll add a field to record whether there's interior cracking present. So again, I'll leave that as a string, and I want to shorten it somewhat just to save space, because for this I'm just going to use a yes/no value in this field. So I'll have that for interior cracking. I'll add one similarly for interior spalling. And then maybe one for interior corrosion in case of a metal cover. Let's see, maybe another one we'll add is channel obstacle, just to record if there's any obstacles in the channel or anything, and I'll just make that a Boolean field so that it'll just record a true/false value for it. So then as soon as I do that, I don't have to specify anything for the field width because a Boolean value is a fixed width. So, and then maybe I'll add one more field here, and I'm just going to call this photos, and this is the field we'll store the path to where we have the photos to record the inspection. So I want to make that a string value, and I'm going to make sure that it's wide enough to record the path. And so I'll specify that field width for that and click apply. And so I think that's all the fields for this demo that I'm going to use for this. And so at this point I'll just click apply, and now it has added the table to my form. Of course I can resize this, so I'm going to stretch it out, make it as wide as the form, maybe make it a little taller to be able to show multiple rows of data. And then I need to look at my properties down here for my table at the bottom of the dialog box. So one of the things I want to do is, if I want to be able to add records or edit records in the table, I need to make sure that the read-only is unchecked. Also, if I delete a feature out of my shapefile, if I want to delete any related inspection data that happens to be in this table as well, then I would need to check this box that says delete related records on feature delete. So what that means is, if I delete the feature out of the shapefile, let's say a particular culvert, then any inspection records related to that particular culvert by that ID or that relationship that we establish would be deleted as well. If I don't want to ever delete those records, then I would just simply make sure this box is unchecked. As far as my table path and table name and everything, I don't have to fool with it because it was set already since we created this table from scratch, so that got all set okay. What I do need to do is define the relationship or the link between the features in the shapefile and the records in the table. So here I have a list box that shows me all available fields in my shapefile or my layer, and so you see these are all the fields available. In addition, I have a list box that shows all available fields in the table that we just created. So here's all of those fields. And so I need to just simply select the field in the shapefile and the corresponding field in the table that's going to establish my relationship. So in this case, it's pretty easy. I have an ID field in my shapefile, and I also have an ID field in my table. And that's actually what I'm going to use to establish the relationship between features in the shapefile and records in the table. I can also choose to sort the records in the table, for the related features that come up. And I'm actually going to use this. I'm going to choose to sort my particular records by the inspection date. And I'm going to actually sort them in descending order. So this will sort all of the related records in this table in descending order by the inspection date. And so it'll have the most recent inspection on top, and then it'll go sequentially down the list to through your older inspections. So all of this is pretty straightforward in terms of this was already prior functionality in previous versions of Simple GIS. But the new functionality involves being able to create the pop-up form that'll pop up if I double click on one of the records in the table or add a new table record. And the way I define that pop-up form is with the table selected, if I look at the properties and on the far right I see a button for pop-up form. And if I click this button, it simply brings up a new form designer dialog. And this particular one is called the Table Pop-Up Form Designer. Does it have all of the tools available on the toolbox? It is a little bit different in that regard, but in this case, I mean, it still has several tools that we can use. And this allows us to set these controls and components to display data for the record that you clicked on in the table. So, for instance, the very first one I'm going to do, I'm going to select under my toolbar. Select the label tool, and I'm going to add a label to my form, and I'm going to call this ID. And so maybe we just want to display the ID that we're happen to be looking at this point in time. So to display the ID, then I'm going to use an edit box control. So I'm going to select that tool and click right underneath my label. And it drops this edit box, and for the data field, then I'm simply going to choose the ID field. And since this field is already automatically populated by the program, if you were to add new records establishing the relationship, I'm going to make this edit box simply read only, so the user can't change the value. It's just simply for display purposes. And I'll shorten this box up a little bit since that ID number is not that long. Now I'll go ahead and drop a new label on the form. And for this label, I'm going to call this inspection date. And now I'm going to use a new control available in the version 12.1.1 release, and it's called a calendar picker. And so what this control is just like the name implies. It allows a user to pick a date off a calendar control. So I'll select this tool, I'll drop it underneath my label, and now if I look at the properties at the bottom of this control, you notice a special note. And you remember when I designed the table, or when I created this table, I added the inspection date as a string 10 characters wide. And this is the reason why. If you take notice of this note, it says calendar control should be tied to a text field with a minimum width of 10 characters as dates are stored as strings in the format year, 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 year. So a 4-digit year dash 2-digit month dash 2-digit day. And it's stored this way for local tables because in this format it makes it easy to sort by those date values. And so remember, I'm sorting the records in this particular table by the inspection date in descending order. So I've dropped the calendar picker control. I just need to select the data field that it's going to be tied to. And in this case, it's going to be my inspection date. And then I'm just going to shorten this up a little bit so it's not quite that wide. And so now I'll have this new control on the form that will allow the user to select a date off of a calendar. Now I'll go ahead and drop the rest of my controls, which are all pretty standard. So I'll come here and I'm going to drop another control, or label rather. I'm going to call this inspected by, and then I'll just use a simple edit box underneath this label, and it's going to be tied to the inspected by field. Maybe make it a little bit wider. And now I'll go ahead and drop some additional controls, and for these others I'm just going to use a radio group. So for these next few, so I'm going to come to my toolbox, I'll select radio group, I'll drop one here underneath my ID, and this is going to be tied to my overall condition field. And for the caption of the radio group, that's exactly what I'll call it. I'll just call it overall condition. And for the radio group items, remember I said we're just going to store something like good, fair, and poor. And after I add my last item in my radio group items here underneath the properties, I just will click in another property here just so that it saves those items that I just added. So as I clicked in the height field, for instance, here under this property, you see that it updated my radio button here with the items I had typed in under the radio group items. So I got good, fair, poor. I'm going to resize this a little bit. And then go ahead and drop some more radio controls on here. So I'll add one for the interior cracking. And again, this is just going to be a yes, no. Let me align this up a little bit better. Go ahead and resize it a little bit. I'll go ahead and drop another one up here. And I'm going to associate this to the interior spalling. And then one more. Let's drop one here. For the corrosion. And I think that's it for our radio buttons. And then I'm going to add now up underneath here, I'll just add a checkbox under my toolbox. So I'll click here and I'll drop a checkbox on here. And this is going to be for the channel obstruction. So I'll associate that to this data field, change my caption. And so it'll just be a simple checkbox to indicate whether there is obstruction in the channel or not. So, and I need to make this a little bit wider. You notice it kind of cut off my label here, so I'll just resize it a little, drag it over. And now I'm going to add a label here up underneath this. I'm going to put the caption for this label as photos. And now I'm going to drop an edit box underneath this label. I'm going to make this pretty wide because that's a fairly wide field. And I'm going to associate this edit box to the photos field. And I may even go ahead and check this as read only because I'm actually going to use some other controls to populate the value of the photo field. So I might just mark this as read only just so that they, a user can't type in a value here. It has to be populated from one of the controls I'm fixing to add. So for photos or linked documents, there is a couple of ways, or really for documents, whether it's a photo or a PDF or Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is, you can use a file selection button which presents the user a button allowing them to select the file that they're wanting to link into the feature through a file selection dialog box. And so where you find that tool is underneath the toolbox. If you kind of go on the left hand side, just past midway down, you see a file select tool. So I can click on this tool and I'll click on the form and you'll see that it adds a button to my form. And this particular button, if you look at the properties underneath, again, I associate it to an edit box control that is going to populate the file or folder that I select, depending on what type of file selection I'm doing, into that particular edit box control. So in this case, if you notice my photos, the name of the edit box we dropped for that was Edit 13. And so under the properties for this file select button under edit box control, when I click on the drop down, I need to select Edit 13 as the control that I'm going to drop the file into. In addition, underneath the file dialog caption, notice that the function of this button, I can either do a single file select or I can do a folder select. So you would use the folder select if you're wanting to link to a folder that may contain multiple photos. It doesn't work for documents. So if you have a PDF or Excel spreadsheet, something like that, you can only link to a single document, so you would need to use the file select. But if you have a folder that has multiple photos for a single feature and you're wanting to be able to reference all of those photos for that single feature, you could use this folder select option. And so when you click on that, you notice that the extension and filters, all of that grays out, because there's no point in specifying that, because what you're doing is you're selecting a folder, and it's going to take all photos underneath that folder and link them to this particular feature. You can change the caption of the dialog box that pops up, just for user friendliness. If you wanted to do, I'm going to call this Select Inspection Photos Folder. And one of the other new features that's been added in 12.1.1 is this checkbox called Auto Manage Links. And what this does is, let's say you had a folder on your hard drive and it was stored, somewhere random on your hard drive, or maybe even on a thumb drive. For portability of data, the best practice is that your shapefile and all of your link tables and link documents and photos should all be stored up underneath the root of the shapefile, whether it's in separate subfolders or what have you. That way, if you ever wanted to port the data, from one computer to another, or you were changing drives or anything like that, you just simply move that whole folder that contains the shapefile and all its related subfolders, and everything maintains its connectivity. And so if you check this Auto Manage Links button, what that will do is, based upon the files you select with this file selection box, it will make a copy of those and create a special subfolder automatically underneath the root of the shapefile, store those copied documents in that so that it manages all of those relationships for you and you don't have to worry with it. And so I'm going to select this Auto Manage Links. And the other feature is, since we're selecting a folder and this is for a single record in our inspection table, you need to have uniquely defined folders that relates the photos or the folder to that specific inspection. And so you have this other option to select a feature ID field that's used in the naming of the subfolders that will be created to store the photos based upon the inspection value. And so in this case, if I click on this, I'm going to select my calendar 4 control, which is my calendar control for the inspection date. And so what it's going to use is the date that's in this control, basically the date we've selected for the inspection, and use that in the naming of a special subfolder to contain all of the photos related to that inspection. So by setting this up this way, the program maintains all of those relationships and links automatically for you. And so it's real important, if you don't want to have to fool with, trying to make sure that, things are stored in the right location and all those relationships. You just make these settings here, and then the program will manage all of that for you. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll move this button over a little bit. Now, another control we could use to add photos, specifically for photos, especially if this was running on, let's say, a Windows tablet or laptop that had a backward facing camera. You could also add in a camera control. And so if you click on this in the toolbox, and it's on the right hand side of the toolbox, and click on the form, it would add a new tool button. And in this particular case, if a user clicks on this, it would actually bring up a dialog box with an interface to the onboard camera on the device, allowing you to take photos interactively in the field and storing them in an appropriate location. So as I add this button, the properties I need to set, again, is the edit box control that's going to store the path to the photos. And again, just like with the file selection, it's this edit 13 edit box control that's tied to our photos field. So that's where it would store the information about the photos in this particular control. And for the camera, I can set it up so that it only takes a single image and stores a single image. Or much like with the file selection, if I didn't want to, just link to a single file and I want it to link to a folder that may have multiple photos, for my camera properties, if I want it to do the same thing, instead of a single image, I would select album. And so I would select that, and that would allow me to continue to take multiple photos and store them in a common folder location that will be linked in for this feature. And then also, much like the file selection button, if you look under the camera properties, in the lower right hand corner, there is a checkbox called Auto Generate Subfolders based on feature ID. And so this is kind of like the auto managed link on the file selection. If I click on this box, what we just discussed about the auto managed links here on this properties is kind of the same thing that applies to this camera button. I click on it. If I select this auto generate subfolders based on feature ID, it will go ahead and create a unique subfolder to store the photos as you take them up underneath the root of the shapefile, such that everything is easily managed and linked together. Again, just like on the file selection, being this is a related table, I also need to select a feature ID field that will be used in the naming of the subfolder. So once again, just like I did on the file selection button, for this field, I'm going to select the calendar control. So it'll use the inspection date of the inspection in the naming of the subfolders. And in this case, when I clicked on this auto generate, you can already see the subfolder structure that it's creating. So up underneath the root of my shapefile, it has a special subfolder called culverts _shape _documents, where it's going to store any linked documents. And then underneath that, because this is a related table, what I'm linking here to, it has the name of the table, inspections _dbf, and then an _docs folder. So it's going to store everything underneath this subfolder, and it'll create unique additional subfolders underneath this based upon the date of the inspection, and that's where it'll store the photos at. So we have that added. Now the next thing I'm going to add is just a preview of the photos so that we can see them on the form. So for that, since we're linking to a folder that has many photos in it, under the toolbox, instead of just a single image preview, which is what you'd use just to preview a single image, I'm going to use the image thumbnails control. So I'll click on that tool, and I'll click here to add it to the form, and then I'm just going to stretch this box. And really the only property I have to set other than the size is just the data field that this is related to. So the data field for this is my photos field. And so that has the path to the folder that contains the photos, and it'll read that folder and display thumbnails of all the images in that particular folder. And then if you wanted to see a full-size view of the image, you just simply double-click on the image to launch it. And then the last thing I'll add is just an OK and cancel button. So I'll just leave all the defaults for the OK. Really, the only thing you have to set is the function for the button, whether I'm, OK, apply, or whether I'm canceling the operation, and then a caption for the button. So I'm going to make this my cancel button. And then the last thing I'll do, I'm just going to resize my form to kind of fit around the contents here. And then that's it. That's my pop-up form. I can click apply at this point. And now I'm back at my form that I designed for my shapefile feature. And if that's all good, I can click apply again. Also, just as an FYI, if you wanted to save this form out to a file and save it so that anytime you loaded this shapefile in a new project, this form would load, all you would have to do is, if you click on the form itself, you come to the Form Properties dialog box, and you can click on this Save Form Design to File. And when you click on this tool, if you were to go and save this underneath the root of your shapefile in the same folder where your shapefile is. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to do so here's my folder where my shapefile is saved at, and you see I'd already saved one, a default there for it. But if I save this form with the same name as my shapefile, just with the form extension, in this case .frm, and save this, it would actually, if anybody in Simple GIS, another project, was to load that shapefile, it would automatically load this form with that shapefile. And so that way you would persist the form from project to project. So I'm just going to apply for now. Oh, I forgot one other thing I need to add to my feature form is I don't have a way to add records into my table. So again, there is a new control that's been added in the 12.1.1 release for editing records in the table, and that's found in the toolbox, and it's called Table Controls. And so if I look along the right hand side towards the bottom, if I click on this tool, and I'm just going to click here on the right hand side above my table, I'm just going to add a couple of buttons, and you see the properties for those buttons. I need to select the table grid that I want to associate these buttons to. So in this case, I only have one linked table on my form, so it's easy, that's the one I select. And then I can choose whether, so let me move these buttons over and maybe just align them a little bit. So by default, you have a plus and a minus button. The plus button allows you to add records to the table. The minus button allows you to delete records out of the table. So if you wanted to allow users to add new records or even edit existing records but not delete, if you uncheck this box that says allow records to be deleted, see the minus button disappears and you're only left with a plus button. So while they can add records and edit records, they couldn't delete records out of the table. If you want to allow them to be able to add, edit, and delete, just make sure you check this box to allow records to be deleted. The minus button comes back. And now I think we're done with the form. So we'll click Apply. Apply once more on the layer properties. And now if I click on my View Feature Data and I click on my culvert, I see I now have this form and I have this linked table here that's been added. But of course, I don't have any way to add records to my table. You notice I don't have the plus or minus button or anything like that. Well, the reason is I'm not editing the feature. So this only becomes available if you are editing the feature itself. So if I dismiss this dialog box, and if I was to right click on my layer and select Toggle Edit, and of course you see that the black X next to the layer name changes from a black to a red X, indicating that it is in an edit state. And now when I click on View Feature Data, I see now I have my buttons here for the plus and minus. Of course, The minus is grayed out because I currently don't have any records in my table. Also notice I have a file selection box that's now visible next to my linked document edit box, allowing me to select if I wanted to select a different file to save and link into this feature. I could do that. So now if I wanted to add a new inspection, let's say I was in the field and I was actually doing a new inspection, I could simply come here, click on the plus button to add a new record, and now I see my new pop-up form that we just designed come up. Of course, here is my calendar control that we added, and as I click on this, you see that you get this nice calendar that you can select from to pick, whatever date that you're doing the inspection on. And then we can type in the name of who's doing the inspection, any of the relevant information. And here is where we can link in our photos. Again, I can't type a value into the photos here because remember we made this edit box read only. But I don't have a camera on this particular machine. If I did, I could click the camera button, start snapping pictures, take pictures, and it would save them. Or I can use my folder select tool button here, click on it. Remember, I am selecting photos here, so I'm just selecting a folder because I'm not linking to a specific document. I'm just linking to a folder containing photos. So in this case, if I had a photo, a folder I had created, and let's say I had stored several photos in that folder for this particular inspection, I can just select this folder, click apply, and now you see that it pulls in the photos. And what it actually did is it made a copy of these photos and it saved them in this subfolder structure that it created. Remember, we had it set to auto manage the links, and so it created a special subfolder underneath the root of my shapefile. Again, I have my shapefile is culverts.shape, so it created a subfolder called culverts_shape_docs. My related record that contains my inspections data is called inspections, so then it created another folder called inspections_dbf_docs. Then it created a subfolder for this particular feature ID because I'm on feature 1. Feature 1 is the unique ID for the feature in the shapefile. And then because I had selected the calendar control as my as part of my subfolder construction, you see that it selected the inspection date, which is 2020 September 30th for photos. And so it created all of this automatically to maintain and place these photos in this root, in this subfolder. And it just makes it a lot easier. If I ever need it now to move this data somewhere, I could just take, my shapefile in its root and all of its subfolders, just zip it up and move it somewhere, and then all the data and the relationship integrity is maintained. So at this point, I can click OK. And now I have saved my inspection record. And of course, now that I have a record in my table, I see that my minus button is active. So if I was to click on this minus button, it's going to say, okay, do you really want to delete this record? If you say OK, then it would remove it from the table. If it was done by accident, you just click cancel. Also, if you wanted to edit the data, so you needed to go back to it, you're not adding a record, not deleting it, but you just simply need to edit this record. You can just simply double click on it. It'll bring up the dialog box, and then you can edit any of these values. And click OK. And so you see that I just changed that value. If I was to double click and go back, you see that it persisted that change that I made. And so that's it. Hope this has been useful. I know it's a lot of information, but again, I think this is really one of the really powerful features available in Simple GIS Client. I think in terms of the form design and the capabilities, you won't find anything much like it in terms of, just being able to visually design these forms and the power that you can instill inside the forms themselves. But as always, I encourage you to visit our website for any information. That website address is just simplegissoftware.com. Thank you. Have a good day.